The portal did not merely open, it detonated. Reality fractured with a screech of feedback that rattled teeth and blurred vision. Penny and Dietrich hit the pavement hard, sliding across the grid of an alleyway that smelled of ozone and damp metal. Above them, the skyscrapers of Docdoron pulsed with neon graffiti, bleeding light into the smog. The air here was not just air, it was a physical weight, vibrating with a relentless, low-frequency bass that hammered against their chests. Penny scrambled to her feet, her hands shaking as she scanned the shifting skyline. Dietrich pushed himself up, his boots slipping on the slick, synthetic surface. Before they could find their bearings, Teora Lowe stepped from the shadows. She stood with a guitar strapped across her chest, her eyes tracking the movement of the neon pulses above. She gestured toward the horizon, where the city lights flickered in time with the thrumming ground. "The noise is the only law here," she shouted. Penny reached for her sidearm, but the vibration of the ground made her fingers clumsy. This was not a place for strategy. It was a place for endurance. Deep beneath the vibrating streets, the city's relentless rhythm faded into a hollow, pressurized silence. Chen stood before the veil, a shimmering curtain of light that stretched across the cavernous chamber. It was the only thing keeping the Prince of Darkness contained, a fragile membrane of energy pulsing in the dark. Beside him, Joe kept his eyes fixed on the tunnel entrance, his hand resting on his weapon, scanning for any sign of intrusion. Chen stepped closer, his palms hovering inches from the barrier. The light was not steady. It flickered, a rhythmic stutter. The barrier dimmed, the luminescence washing out into a dull, sickly gray. Every time the light dipped, the temperature plummeted. Chen pulled his hands back, his breath hitching in his chest. The veil was failing. He looked at Joe, who was staring with a grim intensity. The light sputtered again, a sharp, electric crackle echoing off the walls. The containment was breaking, and the darkness was beginning to stir. While the veil faltered below, the shadows of the lower tunnels became a battlefield of their own. Andy Chow moved with calculated silence, his boots barely brushing the damp concrete. He stopped at a junction box, his fingers working with frantic precision to plant a device that hummed with a discordant, jagged frequency. He was not just hiding, he was actively dismantling the city's stability from within. 50 paces behind, Diao Stan tracked the movement, his hand hovering inches from his holster. He did not rush. He watched Andy's silhouette against the flickering emergency lights, waiting for the moment the sabotage would trigger a collapse. Andy finished his work and turned, his eyes locking onto the darkness where Diao stood. The air grew thick with the smell of scorched wiring. Andy tapped a button on his wrist, and the tunnel lights surged, then died, plunging the corridor into absolute blackness. Diao lunged forward, his boots striking the metal grating with a heavy, rhythmic thud. He shoved past a support pillar, his weapon drawn, but the tunnel was already empty. Diao stood still, listening to the distant, muffled roar of the city above. The discord was spreading. He checked his sidearm, his jaw set, and moved deeper into the dark. The floor beneath Chen and Zhou groaned, a deep, tectonic protest that vibrated through their very marrow. Then, the earth split. A jagged fissure tore through the center of the chamber, swallowing the support pillars and sending debris raining into the abyss. The veil, already flickering, could not withstand the sudden shift in reality. It shattered with a sound like grinding glass, the light collapsing into 1,000 dying sparks. Chen was thrown against the wall, his breath knocked out of him as the chamber plunged into a suffocating absolute dark. From the center of the ruin, a pressure began to build, heavy and cold. It pushed against the air, forcing the oxygen out of the room. A voice cut through the dust. "I remember you, Dietrich." The name hung in the air, weighted with centuries of resentment. Dietrich, standing at the edge of the debris, froze. His hand, reaching for his weapon, stalled mid-air. The shadows in the center of the fissure began to coalesce, twisting into a form that defied light. The Prince of Darkness stepped forward, his feet finding purchase on the broken stone. He looked directly at Dietrich, his eyes burning with a cold, hollow recognition. Dietrich did not wait for the prince to finish his sentence. He lunged, his blade slicing through the stagnant air with a sharp, metallic hiss. The steel struck the prince's shifting form, but instead of drawing blood, the sword met a resistance like thick, cold oil. The prince hissed, a sound of grinding metal, and swiped a clawed hand that sent Dietrich skidding backward across the cracked pavement. Penny moved instantly, pulling her sidearm and emptying the chamber. The muzzle flashes illuminated the alley, but the bullets simply vanished. Holly Motenair sprinted into the fray, her skin glowing as she unleashed a relentless barrage of gunfire, the tracers weaving through the smoke. Arif stood firm nearby, his palms pressed against the air to form a kinetic shield, bracing against the shockwaves. The prince roared, a sound that shook the neon signs from their mounts. His body began to warp, stretching and twisting as blue light bled from his core. Within seconds, the prince was gone, replaced by the cyber dragon. A titan of electric wings and shifting blue skin towered over the street. The cyber dragon did not hesitate. It surged forward, its massive wings crackling with blue electricity that scorched the air. Dietrich braced himself, planting his boots deep into the debris, but the creature swung a heavy, jagged tail with the force of a falling skyscraper. The impact was absolute. Dietrich was lifted off his feet, his body a ragdoll caught in the path of a hurricane. He slammed into a reinforced concrete wall, the structure groaning before it shattered into a cloud of dust and rebar. The silence that followed was heavier than the roar of the battle. Penny scrambled over the jagged rubble, her breath hitching in her throat as she reached the impact site. She found Dietrich lying in the center of a crater, his limbs twisted at unnatural angles. He did not move. He did not groan. The frantic pulse of the city's neon lights flickered against his still face, casting long, rhythmic shadows that made him seem even more distant. The dragon circled above, its electric wings casting a cold, blue glow over the wreckage. Penny looked up at the titan, then back at the motionless form. The roar of the city faded to a dull hum as Takatora stepped from the swirling smoke. Her presence acted like a vacuum, pulling the heat and light from the alleyway. She stopped beside the crater, her gaze locking onto Penny with a terrifying, clinical precision. "I can save him," Takatora whispered, the words cutting through the static of the dragon's wings. "But the price is absolute." Penny looked at Dietrich, his chest still, his skin pale against the gray dust. She did not hesitate. She nodded, a sharp, desperate motion. Takatora reached out, her fingers pressing firmly against Penny's temple. The world tilted. A sudden hollow silence rushed into Penny's mind, colder than the void. She reached inward, searching for the familiar, warm cadence of her mother's voice, the melody she had hummed since childhood. She gripped the edges of the memory, but it dissolved into gray, featureless static. She gasped, her lungs burning as she tried to force a sound that no longer existed. Penny collapsed onto the hard, unforgiving ground, her hands clawing at the air. She was alive, but the most precious part of her history had been erased. Dietrich's eyes snapped open. He did not gasp for air. He surged upward, his muscles coiled with a sudden, jagged power that hummed beneath his skin. He did not look at Penny. He looked only at the titan above. The residual energy of the pact pulsed through his limbs, turning his movements into a blur of kinetic force. He sprinted across the broken concrete, leaping from a jagged pillar to gain height. Penny followed, her sidearm discarded, her hands now steady as she channeled the remaining static into a concentrated beam of light. They hit the cyber dragon in unison. Dietrich's blade carved into the creature's primary wing joint, while Penny's energy blast destabilized the electric core. The dragon shrieked, a sound of grinding metal and dying stars as its massive frame began to fracture. Blue light poured from the cracks, blinding and cold. The creature thrashed, its claws tearing deep gouges into the street. But the abyss beneath the shattered veil opened wide, a hungry mouth of shadow. It pulled the titan down, limb by limb. The dragon disintegrated into shards of light, vanishing into the subterranean dark. With a final, resonant thud, the veil snapped shut, sealing the rift. The city's neon pulse returned, But the street remained silent, heavy with the weight of the victory. Penny stood amidst the cooling debris, her fingers tracing the line of her throat. She tried to summon the melody of her mother's laughter, the one that had anchored her through every jump, but found only a hollow, echoing void. She opened her mouth, but no sound emerged, only the rhythmic thrum of the city's neon pulse. Beside her, Dietrich remained motionless, his gaze fixed on the spot where the rift had been. He did not speak, his silence heavy with the memory of the brother he had just fought. Penny turned as Takatora emerged from the swirling mist, her presence as sharp as a blade. Penny stepped forward, her voice barely a whisper. "What was the second thing?" she asked, the question hanging in the stagnant air. Takatora offered a smile that did not reach her eyes. "That will echo later," she replied, her form beginning to dissolve into the flickering neon light. She vanished, leaving behind only the scent of ozone and a lingering sense of dread. Penny looked at her trembling hands. The debt was not fully paid. The silence in her mind was merely the first installment. Dietrich turned toward the portal, his movements stiff and mechanical. They stood together at the threshold of the next dimension, the city's chaos continuing around them.